So here we are back at the desk for another one of my time-lapse model build videos. In this particular video, we're going to be looking at the construction of this, the Revell Monogram B-17F. Now, I do have a full review of this kit, and I'll put the link up above to that. I go into some detail on some of the controversy with this kit. It came out around the same time that the Monogram kit came out, the Monogram G. And there was a lot of controversy at the time that Revell copied a lot of their tooling in order to make this, because a lot of parts are interchangeable, except this one has a ridiculous lack of internal detail, laughably lack of internal detail. So the Monogram kit was heads and tails above this back in the day. Eventually Monogram bought Revell, hence the Revell Monogram branding on this particular box. I'm going to be building this up as the YB-40, which was the gunship version of the B-17, and I'm using the Paragon conversion set. Now this set has been pretty much unobtainium for many years. I bought it about 20 years ago and had it sitting on the side. So I finally pulled this out and decided to finally build this, partially because I have way too many B-17 kits in the closet, and partially because I finished watching Masters of the Air and I really want to have a B-17 built. So anyways, that's what I'm doing. I'm doing it up to the YB-40, so there'll be some modifications and conversions going on into this, and I'm going to be painting it with a mix of leftover decals from other kits as well as custom masks to make it up as a YB-40, because there's just no decals available for that particular airframe. So on that note, let's jump right into this. You can watch me, this is part one, so this is just the build of this aircraft up to primer stage. So let's get into it. My name is Sean, and this is Sean's Aviation. So here we are for the start of a new time lapse, and as I'm assuming you've probably seen the title, you know what I'm building, and it is this, the 1/48 scale Revell Monogram B-17F. It's actually the Revell molds from the early 80s, I want to say, maybe even late 70s. Excuse me. The kit itself has been started. I'll put the review up top if you haven't seen it yet. I've got a mega review of all my 1/48 scale B-17s, and this is included in that mega review. And I'll be converting it into a YB-40, the gunship version of the B-17. Now I'm going to be doing some extra work. I've got some aftermarket, the Paragon YB-40 conversion here. So there's some cutting I need to do specifically to get, well, I mean, there's, you know, the chin turret gets installed and all that other stuff, and there's dual guns and some other bits and bobs, but the big thing is this plug needs to be glued into the fuselage, and I need to just measure out and make sure I cut in the right place. Now, luckily, it looks like it's a relatively easy cut. Yeah, it looks like I just have to follow. Looks like I just have to follow. Let's make sure I have that right again. Yeah. It's designed to follow existing panel lines, which is really nice of them. Like that. I just have to cut out everything inside here. On both sides, and then that should just slot right into place. I'm just doing, you know, a little bit of pre-work here. I'd like to get this cut out first, and then there we go. So that's got to get cut out, and that's really it. Other than having that cut out and glue this plug in place, which I'll probably end up mounting, tape the fuselage together, and then get this glued into place. onto one side only, and then I can pull it apart, do all my work, glue it back together, and then clean up the seams after. And yeah, that's just how it's gonna have to go. Other than that, there's just some minor changes. As you can see, there's some stuff that's been glued in already. I have to clean up back here. I'll do something with that. There's some modifications I need to do around the waist gunners positions. Clean up the opening where it was supposed to have the windows glued in, because it wouldn't. The doors are gonna be mounted on the inside. I'm gonna have to mount the doors on the inside. I'll mount some stuff inside the bomb bay to hold the rod, because it will be mounted on a stand. So I'm gonna have to get that sorted out. And I'm gonna be using some aftermarket pieces. I'm gonna be using some pieces other than the Paragon set, some pieces from the Pro-Modeler kit. I'm gonna use the crew, so the bomb aimer, the pilots, and one or possibly both waist gunners. And I'll put them in place. I'm also gonna I might use some of the aftermarket, the other pieces for the rear here from the Pro-Modeler set, some of the floors and stuff. We'll see. But honestly, once you start getting things like the dual machine guns in the opening, you know, you're not going to be able to see much into there anyways. Add in the ammo belts, which come in gotta make sure I get these figured out right. I think they come across from the top. Yeah, like that. You can see how they line up like that. Yeah, perfectly line up too. So that comes through like that and comes out of the ammo boxes. Yeah, once you start filling in that space in the rear fuselage, there's not gonna be a lot you can see. I know I'm kind of rambling here, but I'm also planning while I'm looking at this. The interior is also very basic. There's a small section that fits here with the bomb aimers. Then there's the cockpit, and there's nothing in here. And for the rest of the back here, there's literally nothing. So that turret back here will hide a lot of that. Pilots, the bomb aimer will hide a lot of the nose section. The waist guns. We'll see what it looks like once I get the guns installed. If I need to go down the road of also doing the waist gunners, I can do those later. I'm gonna do it fine. Yeah. Anyways, there's gonna be a little bit of work on this, especially with the masking and painting, to make sure I can get it all done. Luckily, it's all just like a solid color, olive drab, so I can probably do the main color and touch it up after and all that kind of stuff. So we'll figure it out. I don't want to have to worry about things like the machine guns in the nose and stuff being broken off, so we'll get there. We'll figure it out. It's going to be a neat looking model. It's going to be more or less level, so I'll probably be able to take it on and off the stand, especially if I use an aluminum tube, so I can put it up and it's less chance of me breaking things, and I can work on it sitting on a stand. Plus I've got my work stand here, which I can also work on and keep it protected, make sure I don't start snapping off guns and stuff. So order of operations is going to be key on this particular build to make sure I don't break things off and I stay ahead of the game. Sorry for knocking the mic. Yeah, anyways, I'm going to get started by cutting that out, and we'll go from there. So this is one of those few kits where I don't, in fact, start working directly on the cockpit. I go ahead and I start cutting out the fuselage area where that resin plug will go in, and that's mostly because it's a lot of work and you don't want to start cutting like that and manhandling the two halves of the fuselages while you have bits and pieces glued in. So you'll see I go ahead, I get that area cut out, I get the plug to fit properly, and once I'm more or less happy with the fit, then I go ahead and I start getting some of those interior pieces cut apart, cut out of the sprues I should say, and starting to get paint and detail done. That way when I start to assemble the fuselage, I have the plug in place and I can start to clean all that up as I clean up the rest of the seams. So here we are. I figured it was time for a little bit of a talk of this kit because I haven't really done any talking since the beginning. I've obviously been poking away at this, and I'm at a point now where it's kind of starting to get into the realm of detail. And I figured I'd want to give you guys an update on where I'm going with this so you can understand my thought process as you're watching me build this. It's going to be a little bit different than most kits. Usually I'm, working really diligently to get lots of detail, and, even though a lot of it gets hidden and you're never going to see it again, I go through the process. This is going to be the exact opposite. As I've mentioned with this kit, it's an undetailed kit. The interior is very basic. And now I could have gone down the road of buying a whole bunch of, Edward photo etch or some aftermarket, 3D decals from a bunch of those, there's a bunch of suppliers out there that make those. And I could have really, really fleshed out this interior so you could see it. I don't want to. For lack of a better term, I don't want to. I'm a little kind of detailed out after those last kits I did. And I know this is going to be a lot of work, so I just want to get it done. And I know that might sound a little weird, but that's just kind of where I am with this. So as I mentioned sort of in the intro to this, I'm going to use some of the detail pieces from the Pro-Modeler kit and just kind of use them to hide the detail. So you've seen me cut this out. I have this glued in already. You'll see already the fit isn't perfect. It's going to take a little bit of tape and glue and super glue. I've already got some super glue on this side. But basically once I get this fuselage glued together, I can hit this with a coat of primer, and then I can just work on this seam. This is going to be the hardest part, I think, of the entire kit. That and not breaking machine guns off. But I have that cut out already. It's ready. Once it's finally glued on and sanded down, that is done. And then I've painted the interior green. Now I know there's a few issues with the way I've done this. I'll point them out for you. You know what? I don't like the way this camera is set up. Yeah. I'll point them out to you just for the sake of honesty, and also if any of you are watching this as kind of a how-to build, you don't end up going down the wrong road. The interior of B-17s is a really touchy subject. As the war progressed, the interior painting changed as they were built by, they weren't just built by Boeing, they were also built by Lockheed in Burbank, as well as Douglas. So there was different manufacturers, and that changed kind of how things were painted. Effectively, the forward section of the B-17 should be like a dark gold green, or a bronze green. A bronze green in the forward section with the olive drab padding and plywood floors. And then as you worked your way back through the bomb bay and into the rear fuselage, it was basically left as bare aluminum. Now again, you'd get different variations of internal stringers being painted, but the skins being left bare or everything left bare. Some had plywood floors, some had black floors like an anti-skid surface on them. It just varied depending on where the sub-assemblies came from and what time of the war it was being built on. I'm, again, not going to go through that whole process. I am literally just painting the insides green. I went with US dark green, a World War II dark green. It's not quite the bronze green that it should be, but you're not going to see anything in this anyways. The B-17 is notoriously bad for seeing inside. Small windows. I mean, I've got the other one up there and you can barely see anything in it. And I'm going to be using the gunners to kind of hide my crimes. So I don't really care, I guess, is the best way to put it. It's just enough green that when you look in, you're going to see green. And then I've got all of these extra parts over here, things like the cockpit painted up. I'll have to go through and do some detail painting on this at some point, all of the instrument panel and stuff like that, and flat coat all of that in and whatnot. But you can see once you get this assembled, right, paint some of these parts black, dry brush, put the seats in, and then this is where I'm planning to hide a lot of it so no one else is going to see it. So if I just do that and then you place the pilot in there, pilots do seem a little on the small side for the model. I feel like they should be a bit bigger. They're just a little under scale. I'm assuming they're purposely under scale so that they fit in there nicely, but like their feet don't come anywhere close to touching the rudder pedals. So just a little undersized. But again, once that's painted up and weathered and detailed and that's sitting inside you know, the window, you're not going to see anything in the cockpit anyways, and so it's not going to matter that there's pieces missing as well. I can't find the control yokes. I don't know what happened to the control yokes. But yeah, you're not going to see much of this. It's going to be hidden, you know, once it's, like I said, painted. I'm not going to paint the floors plywood. I want to leave them green. I'm going to do some black wash, some dry brushing, some weathering, really get these pilots painted up as best as I can. Same thing, some dry brushing, some weathering, right? You're going to lose a lot of the detail in this cockpit, and that's the point. It means I don't have to worry about the absolute lack of detail, because these guys are going to be the focal point. You're going to look and be like, oh, pilots. And two, you're not going to see past them to see that I'm missing a bunch of pieces. And then again, you have to imagine that this is going to be, you know, basically like that. So you're not going to really see anything in there other than the fact that there's pilots. Same in the nose. My plan, again, there's no floor in the nose. I know I've mentioned this before, but if you actually take this fuselage half off and you start placing the cockpit pieces where they belong, that actually goes like that. And then again, the positive fit is so bad that the fit is so bad that you can't even just place this in. In most kits, you can at least place the interior somewhere close to its final position, and it just kind of sits there. In this, it just doesn't want to. The location is so vague and that it just doesn't like to sit. But anyways, there's, you know, that, and then this nose piece here kind of sits like that. And like I said, you see there's no floor, there's no navigator's table, there's nothing in this nose section. So just a little bit of highlights, dry brushing, and then he's over here. I have him hiding over here, but one of these guys is I believe it's this guy here. I'm keeping them separate so I don't lose track of whose arms belong to who. And then, yeah, my plan is to just have this guy. I'm going to have to adjust a little bit because he's just slightly too tall. So I'm going to have to shave a little bit of his head and a little bit of his feet. And my plan is to have him right here, holding that right-hand side nose gun, so that, because again, he's designed to stand down here on this floor and hold the left side nose gun from the monogram kit, but I want him a little farther forward and holding that right-hand side. So I'm just going to flatten his head and shave off a little bit of his feet, cut the feet down about halfway, and that should get me very close. And the head, just a flat spot on the top of his head, he'll tuck in right here. He'll hold that nose machine gun on the right side, and then when you look in the middle, you don't see anything, because all you can see is this guy standing right in front of the nose. You'll see the bomb bay, the Norden bomb sight, you'll see the seat, and then you'll see this guy, and he's going to block that whole view down the nose. So between that, and same thing in the waist, I'm going to have oh wow, that did not last very long. I've already scratched a bunch of paint off of that. Wow. Okay, I got to let this paint cure. Anyway, so that's kind of my plan, and it's just going to allow, like I said, it's going to allow me to not have to worry about all of that interior detail. So if you're watching me build this and you're questioning, you know, what in the hell is he doing? He's just, you know, that's what it is. I'm going to make it look just good enough to pass and not worry about all of the detail. So that's where I am with that. So I mean, next steps, I'm not even sure next steps. I think I might have to start getting that, I'll probably start detail painting some of the black details on the cockpit and the instrument panel and that center console, get that done, get some black wash, get some highlights in there, paint the seats, all of the cushions olive drab, get the Norden bomb sight glued in, maybe even start gluing the cockpit, like the halves in there, the nose and the cockpit section into the fuselage. That way I can start really figuring out where all the placement's going to be, because once I get that done, then I can get these windows glued in. I can get them masked on the outside pretty much ASAP, which limits the damage to those. I'm going to have to figure out machine guns. The kit, Paragon kit that I got, I haven't even done this math yet, so I might as well do it live here while I'm with you. It included 3 full sets of resin gun barrels, which I think gives me enough. If we look at the B-17, I need 2 for the chin turret, 2 in the nose, 2 for, let's not count the top turret right now, 2 for the mid turret, Then from this one, I get 2 for each waist, 2 for the ball turret, and then I get 2 for the tail, and I get 2 for the top turret and 2 spare. So I actually get enough gun barrels to replace every barrel on this aircraft with a resin detailed gun barrel, which is nice because the gun barrels that they provide are just little sticks. So my plan is going to be, for the nose, I'm going to cut the barrels off, mount the breeches on the inside of the windows, and then I can glue the exterior barrel on later, which works quite well because then I can get the guy set up, you know, I can glue it all together at the same time. If I have everything put together, I can get the guy, I can get the breech, I can get his arms, I can arrange everything in the right orientation, and then glue that in. Same in the waist. I'm going to use the 2 waist gunners, so they're going to be offset probably, I don't know which way yet, but either way, I'll have to figure out how to mount those double machine guns. I've started working on those. I have to get an internal mount set up, mount those guns, probably drill a hole in those as well, and then figure out, I do have these floors that came from the Pro-Modeler kit. I just need to figure out if it's something I need to use or not. It's going to depend. Once I get those guns in place and I start getting things in, I'll see whether I need to put those floors or not. I'm assuming not. I think the guys will just stand on the ground. We shall see. Yeah, anyways, I've been rambling, but I'm also kind of planning in my head. So that's going to be the next step, is working on this forward section, getting the cockpit assembled, get it glued in place, get that bomb bay section glued in place, get the windows glued in, and then I can start gluing in gun breeches and getting the guy, figuring out the waist guns, again, getting the double breeches and getting the guys set up back here. And then once I'm happy with that, I can effectively glue this, I'm not going to get the ball turret painted up, but then after that I can glue this together, because then the guys will be back here. I can drop the pilots in after the fact, the nose will be done, and then I can just start cleaning up this around here. Yeah, so it's not going to be as much work as I thought. It's going to be a little bit of work, but not as much as I hoped, and it should fall in quite nicely with my other round of kit. So that's where I am with that. So let's keep going with this, and we'll see the next stages. And basically, despite what I just said, I went ahead and started working on the wings. The main reason for that is I wanted to get the landing gear areas and parts prepped for aluminum paint. So I went ahead and I got the lower wings and the wheel wells and the landing gear, and then I modified the landing gear in order to build it with the wheels up. And then from there, I started working on the crew members. And you'll see I get the crew members glued up. The one thing I realized as I started working on this, that there was no easy way. I couldn't glue the arms onto the figures until I had the machine guns in place and I knew kind of what those angles needed to be, because everything has to line up. So you'll see as I start working on these figures, I actually have, especially with the gunners, I have their bodies in little plastic cups, and I keep track of what belongs with which by using those little shot glasses. And I always ensure I line them up properly, and then I can keep track of what parts are what. But I go ahead and I start by painting the leather outfits, and then all of the details, the black boots, the handles, the parachute straps, all that kind of stuff, getting the arms glued up, and then I start putting them all together once I get the fuselage kind of ready to go, and I can start figuring out those angles. Now I'm starting to get to the point where I need to start gluing the crew members together. And this is opening up a whole can of worms that I'm not quite prepared to figure out yet. So, first things I gotta do is just get a way to have this fuselage sit. I need the fuselage to sit like that. Let's see, how can I do this? Like that, maybe? I don't know. Okay, anyways. So I've got the machine guns, the twin guns for the waist. I used a push pin to mount them to what will be the stand, which I'll have to cut down and then glue into the window. But then I'm also trying to figure out kind of height of the gunners so I know. So what I need to do, there's a lot of different things, right? So the height that the gunner is going to stand, I should say, in the fuselage dictates where his arms are. But then his arms are posable, and that will dictate where the gun is. And I'm assuming if I center the gun in the opening, right, that will dictate roughly where I need to trim the pin. Now I'm just kind of winging this here because I don't actually know what's going to work and what isn't. Right? So now that should mount. See, pin's a little too tall. I got to trim off another tiny amount off the bottom of that. Again, just winging it. That looks about right in the opening, right? So now, if that gets mounted, let's see if I can use a tiny amount of tape and tape this in place. Will that allow me to actually, I think it will. Now, no, that's too floppy. I need to glue that in place. I'd like to have the waist gunner again. I am completely winging this right now just to see. Okay, so that side can fit like that. That arm is completely different than that arm. See, this is the issue, is how do I is he supposed to be pointing? Holding the gun with one hand and pointing? Okay, I don't know. And then the other issue is how do I even mask and paint that once I'm assembled? Okay, well, I really don't know how I'm going to get this to work. I'm thinking I'm probably going to have to paint the olive drab around the outside of the window. And then yeah, I'm gonna have to paint a good section of this fuselage olive drab and then mask around that opening with a piece of card, like tinted piece of paper. You know what I mean? Like get a little piece of paper, tint it. Tape that on, and then when I do the actual painting, I can paint around it and it'll minimize the spray in there, I think. Or use a piece of shot glass. I don't know, paper cup. I gotta figure this out. But either way, I'm gonna have to glue the gunners and the guns in before I mask off this area and start painting it. And I'm just running out of ideas on how I can do that. But I think that's the only way to do it, is actually glue all this together, which for some reason, the super glue I used to glue that pin in place just didn't work. But yeah, I'm gonna have to basically glue this pin in place. Paint the gun black, the pin part black. Glue the gun into the side of the fuselage, and then make the guy fit. And just live with whatever I get, because I don't think I'm going to get this to look as good as I hoped. I think I'm just gonna have to get it to a point that I can live with and move on with that. My super glue seems to be drying on me in the container, and so it's not working very well, but yeah. Just gonna have to go with it. Get that pin painted black, get this gun glued into the opening. And then just glue the guy onto it as best as I can. Make him look decent. And then at least that way when I put it all together, it's not gonna look horrible. Also, cockpit's been glued together. I'm gonna pull the, sorry, not glued together, glued in. And then that way, as I'm assembling things, I can there we go. Just like there we go. There we go. Why does this not want to line up? Have I told you how much I detest this Revell kit? Because if I haven't yet, I detest it. The fit is so bad. There we go. So that's going to be how that all goes together. It's going to be a lot of filling and sanding, and I'm assuming super glue in my future to get all this to hold together in the proper orientation. But yeah, I think it'll look good with the gunners. mounted in there. And then there's going to be the one guy inside the nose as well. Just kind of hiding that lack of detail. I was going to have him hold this forward gun, but I think I might have him holding this gun out that side. We'll see. Yeah, anyways, slowly but surely. Fighting the good fight. And here you'll see I start the process of getting those waist guns glued into position, figuring out kind of where those angles are going to be and how those waist gunners are going to sit. And the other thing you'll notice is I've painted the outside of the fuselage around the waist guns olive drab. And I did that so that I could then mask that area off with just some tape, finish the construction of the model, and at the very end, just come back, do some light touch-ups, and it'll be fixed. But it's not going to have, you know, it will look a lot better than if I attempted to paint around the window in the end. Is basically what I'm trying to say. This was the best way I could find to get that olive drab painted, put the machine guns in place, and then paint the fuselage at a later state, and not have any real, you know, weird masking, weird seam or paint lines, or end up accidentally breaking those machine guns out. So that's why if you see the olive drab, that's kind of why I did that. And then you'll see I start getting those waist figures, the gunners glued in place, making sure they don't interfere with each other, making sure it's nice and solid. You'll see when I glue them in, I'm putting a lot of super glue and a lot of the activator down. I don't really care because you're not going to be able to see their feet. So if I have a little bit of a blob of super glue down there, I'd rather them be in there and be mounted strong than have a, you know, and look slightly unrealistic, than do it scale and have them potentially pop off down the road. So I got those guys glued in, and we just continue on with the build process. And just so I can clear up any confusion on kind of what I'm doing here, I'm getting the tail wheel glued in. And my plan is to complete this on a stand with the wheels retracted. And that means the tail wheel has to be retracted. But this kit did not give you any provisions to install this with the wheel retracted. To be perfectly honest, it has a keyed pin with a keyed hole to ensure the tail wheel lines up properly when extended. So it took a bit of work to get them retracted. So I actually just cut all of that off, and you'll see I clamp a piece of styrene to the bottom of the fuselage, and that acts as like a platform. So I could glue that tail wheel in place. The tail wheel would rest on that styrene and give itself the right orientation it needed in order to be mounted properly. And then once it's dry, I was just able to remove everything, and then the tail wheel was in place. And of course, there was a ton of like glue and super glue and everything in there holding it all together. Okay. Okay, quick status update on this B-17, as I think I've got just had a talk. So I'm almost at the point where I can assemble this fuselage. I actually have a little list so I wouldn't lose track of what I needed to get done before I could take this to the next step. And as far as I can tell, I am there. So on the interior, I have all of the interior pieces, and I've mentioned before how much of a lack of interior detail there is. This is literally the extent of the interior detail for this kit. Not a whole lot to go on. But on this right side fuselage, I've got the interior pieces. I do have, as we've mentioned, as you've seen a few times, this YB-40 conversion pieces installed and glued. I have the right side waist gunner. I've got the right side nose gun installed. I've also got the controls for the chin turret installed. This is the base of the Norden bomb sight. I didn't install the Norden bomb sight. I left the base there. I don't know how accurate that is. We will see. Well, I'm not going to see. I'm not going to worry about it. That's how it's going to be. Tail wheel is also glued in. This kit did not include any provisions for a retracted tail wheel. So I've had to kind of make up my own. And it's not the best, but it's going to look the part when it's all assembled and on a stand. You're not going to see much of the bottoms. Like I said, this is going to be one of those just it's done models. I'm not going to worry too much about getting the details accurate. I just want to get it finished. If I get bogged down, I've found this issue with the F-82s as well as this Lincoln. If I get bogged down too much in the actual details of it, because it takes me so long to build kits, I just lose interest. So I want to just get stuff done. I'm still going to do some effort to make it look good. I'm just not going to be too worried about the small details. Left side of the fuselage, I have the left side gunner installed, the waist gunner, as well as the bombardier on the left side nose gun. I would have liked him to be on the right gun because he's sitting a little farther forward in the nose, but I ran into issues with height. If his feet are on the floor here, he ends up hitting here. The character was designed to use the floor that sits between these, but this one doesn't have it. So I've had to kind of do my best to make it work. Now, it's enough when you get it assembled that it hides the crimes of the interior of this and it busies up the interior, and that's what I'm actually looking for. I've also drilled the hole for where the stand is going to be. I'm using some aluminum tubing to mount in here, and then that will and take a brass rod. Sorry, lost my train of thought. I've got the brass rod here. You can see two of them fit nicely. So I'm going to install the aluminum tube. I wanted to do this while the fuselage was in halves to make sure that I got a good mounting at the top. I'm going to offset it just slightly. Yeah, I mean, I could go straight up. We'll see. Either way, I'm going to use some epoxy. I'm going to glue this in. This will ensure I get a really, really good epoxy seal on the inside of this fuselage. And it's going to be nice and solid. And then once I glue the fuselage together, I don't have to worry about this popping off after the fact and getting loose inside. So that's why I ended up doing it this way. I used a step drill, a step bit. If you haven't seen a step bit, I highly recommend it for plastics, especially this type of kit. A normal drill bit, it cuts on the edge, on this very first tip is where the cutting edge is. Then the spiral is what allows the material to come out, but it acts like a screw. So once you get into the plastic, it wants to continue pulling. So especially in this case where I didn't have the seams glued, if you're trying to drill a hole right on a seam as that drill bit bites into the plastic, it wants to pull the plastic up and pull that seam, and it pops the seam. Or because of the way the cutter works, it pushes the seam apart. So you get a pulling and apart, and it pushes and pops the seam. These step drills don't cut on the edge, they cut on the side. So as it's pulling, it's not pulling itself in, it's just cutting the edge. You can hold it in one place and just ream it out. And that's it. I was actually able to just hold the fuselage halves together with my fingers and use this step drill to get in here and clean everything up. And it works really, really well, and I highly recommend it if you're doing any type of hole drilling on plastic, especially if you're going to be drilling, as I said, along a seam. So as far as I can tell by looking at my list as well as the instructions, I've done everything I need to do before I can assemble the fuselage. The only thing I haven't done yet is gluing in the ball turret, and I'm gonna try to install this in a way that I can install the ball turret later, and I think I can. I think it's gonna give me enough play, especially if I sand those little things down so that I can install this now, and then after the fact go through and install the actual the ball turret, which I believe I'll be able to do after, because I'm going to glue it solid. I don't want it to move, so I'm able to trim these down significantly. I'm actually going to glue the ball turret together here soon, and then I can play with this after I put it together and make sure that this is actually going to work the way I want it to work. But I got a little bit of cleanup to do on that, but I'm very, as far as I can tell, I'm getting very close to being able to glue these fuselage halves together. So yeah, we're moving along. It looks really good. And like I said, you look inside the waist, you don't see the fact that there's lack of detail because the characters and the guns fill up the space. Same in the nose. You look down inside that nose and you're not really going to tell that there's a lack of detail in there because there's all kinds of stuff going on, and guns and people, and it hides all those crimes. And same with the cockpit. I've got the pilots here. Still need a bit more work to do on them, but they'll glue into the seats. And then once you install the cockpit piece and the clear parts, you're not going to see much in there at all. It's going to hide a lot of the crimes. So you see I've got a lot of seam work to do, so I'm going to be losing some of the detail, the panel detail, but I'll live with that. Once you get some variation on paint and stuff going in, it'll really make it look good. And yeah, I'm excited. I'm moving along a lot faster than I thought I would. I've had a bit more time than I expected to have, so I'm taking advantage of it while I can and getting this done. But yeah, I'm happy with this. It's going to be fun. I'm getting close to that, sanding the fuselage, getting some details ready, and painting. So I like it. Yeah, so let's keep moving along. I'm going to clean this up. I'm going to start assembling the ball turret, making sure that all of that will actually go together properly, and then yeah, I can start assembling this fuselage, and then I can start getting things like windows on and masks, and getting the nose cone put on and the tail gun put on, and masking all that stuff up in the cockpits and whatnot. And yeah, plugging along. Let's keep going. And here I start the process of gluing the fuselage together. I do this the exact same way I do all my other fuselages. I use liquid glue. I use thicker glue on some of the pins where needed, but for the most part, I just hold it together. I use the liquid glue. I work my way around. I ensure the glue capillaries down through the seam. I tape it down when needed, or I clamp it when needed, but I work in stages. I'll glue you know, one section, then another, and I slowly work my way around the fuselage, gluing it together, and that ensures that you don't have any, especially if a fuselage is warped and you try to clamp it, you can clamp the warp into it. In this case, you work your way down the seam and you make sure everything's in alignment, everything's nice and tight, there's no weird gaps, nothing like that. And yeah, I get the fuselage glued together, and then you start to see what looks like a B-17. Now, this might look like a bit of a drastic move, but that resin plug didn't quite sit properly. The curve of the plug was slightly different than the curve of the fuselage. So I ended up just basically using a Dremel to grind those edges down and try to match the curve of the fuselage to the curve of the plug and make sure it looks nice and clean. And you'll see there is a buttload, a metric buttload, to be honest, of putty that goes into making sure all of this gets cleaned up and smoothed out and looks somewhat decent at the end. So I've been following along. You've seen I've gotten this to a relatively advanced stage. A coat of primer was put on just to check some sanding. Another coat of putty was put on, but you'll see I've got this all kind of fared in, cleaned up, and I'm working away. That's really the worst of it. Other than that, I sort of work my way around, cleaning up some of the seams. This cockpit turtle deck is going to be a bit of a pain. I'm going to have to get things like the pilots painted up and the top turret installed and masked off and all that stuff before I can glue this in place, and then clean up all of those seams. Right now I'm getting this nose prepped. You would have seen me go through and do some cutting on that and cleaning up of this. I'm going to have to super glue this in place, and in order to super glue onto clear plastic, you need to protect it. And the easiest way I have found, or I've learned over the years to do that, is just using Future floor wax. Same stuff I use with decals and whatnot. So it gives the clear parts sort of I guess a bit of a backstory. If you super glue, when you super glue, it off gases as it dries. And that off gassing can actually leave like a white residue, a white film on clear plastic. And it is basically impossible to clean it up once that has been once it's done. So Future will actually stop that clear fogging effect from happening. So you just have to coat the plastic both inside and out with a little bit of Future. And then when you super glue, oh no, I don't want that to happen. And then once you super glue, that fogging will not happen. So I'm just gonna make sure I don't have any bubbles or anything, try to get this as clear as possible. I'm gonna rest it sort of like that, and that way gravity will pull it down and it'll build around the edge. And then once I super glue it in and sand that edge down, it should hide the worst of it. While I'm at this, I should have done this prior to gluing these together, but I wasn't thinking ahead. I'm going to Future these windows both inside and out, and that will allow, or ensure I should say, that when I glue that forward nose perspex in place, that it won't fog up any of these windows. Yeah, this is not easy. Now I gotta try to get like up and around without knocking that off. Well, here's hoping that that doesn't fog up on me. But anyways, that will ensure, as I said, when I super glue them on, that it doesn't fog up. Yeah. So moving on, we'll get these this clear perspex glued onto the nose here soon. Get that seam cleaned up as well. Get those forward windows masked off. And then I'll start working on that cockpit section. Get that done, get these seams cleaned up, and then I can, really, it's just a hop, skip, and a jump, and then I'm ready to start painting. So we're moving right along. So let's keep going. And here you'll see once I get the nose glued together, I realize I never put any future on the inside of the side windows. And that's the kind of stuff that can ruin a model, because while I futured the nose perspex, when you go to super glue that on, depending on the angle it's sitting and what happens with fumes, your fumes can work its way back and mark up and stain those other windows. So I mean, I'm taking a chance it might still happen, but I went ahead and I used these little tiny brushes I have, and I tried to get in and cover those windows with future from the inside out, or from the inside, I should say, using the little holes in the nose, just to try to limit how much of the fumes are going to come back and stain those windows. So kind of a mistake, but I did my best to fix it. And to be perfectly honest, at the time of this recording, I still haven't pulled the masks off, so we'll have to see how that looks when I pull it off. So here you'll see I start getting the masking done, and I had a B-17G, a partially used B-17G masking set. So I was able to use parts from that to do part of this. It didn't line up perfectly, obviously, but I was able to get some of the windows covered with that, and the windows I didn't have masks for, I just went ahead and used the standard Tamiya tape and X-Acto knife and cut them out. And then I went ahead and I started getting as much of that kind of the window section cleaned up as I could. On the nose, I should say, getting all the windows installed, and then it's just a matter of cleaning up seams. And again, you'll see me go over and over with, you know, some putty and sanding and whatnot to try to get this looking as good as I can before I move on to the primer. And here you'll see I start going through and cleaning up the wings. Again, there's going to be a lot going on around these wings with the engines and the exhaust staining and whatnot. So I clean up a little bit, and this kit's old and has quite a few issues, so I'm not making it look absolutely perfect. I'm just going along and making the worst of it look okay, so that presentation wise it looks decent. I'm just trying to match the basis of this kit. Like I said, it's not very detailed and there's a lot of issues, but I'm just trying to make sure everything looks good. So I'm going around the wing, I'm cleaning up some of those seams, doing my best to fix what I can. And you'll see here now we're starting to get into the fun bits. I've got fuselage primed. I've got the wings primed. I'm just going around and correcting the small, little, tiny problems that still exist on the kit. The little minor imperfections that I keep picking up. And then there's a little bit of work I got to do. I don't quite recall when in the build sequence I do it, but one of the wings, I believe it was the right wing, didn't quite seat properly onto the fuselage. So there's a little bit of modification I needed to make to the those locking pins to ensure that the wing does push forward as far as it needs to be to line up appropriately. And once I get that sorted, those wings get glued in, and then it's just a little bit of seam filling again, a little bit of Mr. Surfacer, and a little bit of putty just to make sure that those wing seams and the horizontal stabilizer seams and all the last little things look really, really good. And then we are moving on to the next stage. So here we are. This is a pretty good point, in my opinion, to wrap up part one of this build and move on to part two. And part two is going to be all of the painting and finishing and weathering. And this is what it looks like right now. So like I said, there's really nothing else to do on this other than start painting. Now it's confession time. This model has been something that I have been planning for many, many years. I'd say probably at least 15, if not 20 years. That I've been planning to build this kit. I purchased the F model years ago. I bought the Paragon conversion kit years ago, which I'm glad I did because these things are like as rare as hen's teeth today. And I was doing a lot of research, and I had a file on the computer and a folder with pictures, and I specifically went out and purchased a 303 bomb group book that includes the history of some of the YB-40s in order to read up on them and make sure I had all the info. And I had all that sitting in a closet, and part of it was in the model box, part of it was on the computer. And then yeah, I'm like, you know what, let's do it, let's build it. So I pulled it out, and I realized I couldn't find my instructions. So I went online, I found a really crappy copy of the instructions that you could barely read, and from that I'm like, yeah, okay, this is easy. All I got to do is chin turret, and this upper turret gets added in, and the double waist guns. Yeah, I can do that. This is easy. And I just started building, and I started hacking, and you saw the video. It's all the beginning of this video. I started assembling everything, and I used the Pro-Modeler guys inside to busy up the interior, and did it all and glued it all together. And yeah, a couple of days ago, when I started planning the markings on this, I realized it doesn't line up. There's a problem. So then I started going through and looking at my, and I did some more research. I don't want to sound like I just jumped into this. I was digging around. I was looking at research, and part of what I had read up was that the XB-40 had staggered waist guns, but the YB-40s didn't. They had the standard waist guns, and the XB-40 staggered waist guns didn't come out until the later G models. Sure, I liked that evidence. It made sense, and so I went with it, and built it. And then I started looking at the marking options, and I realized that the marking options don't work. The roundel does. Anyways, it looks like, now that I've done a bit more research, and I've gone back and looked at my original notes, and my original notes included the fact that I was supposed to stagger the waist guns, and I didn't. I had planned on doing it. That was my initial plan. It looks like I had done all my research back in the day, and I had come to the conclusion that based off photographic evidence, this side's window is farther forward than the other side, and that's how the markings can line up. And I dropped the ball. So I'm gonna have to adjust it, and I'm gonna fudge the markings on this side, on the right side, the fuselage, just to make it work on the model. It's not gonna be perfectly historically accurate, but hey, it is what it is. Confession time over. So the next steps on this is going to be paint. Now the markings on this, I am doing it up as, and obviously this is the end of part one. If you want to watch part two, I'll put a link down below. If you're watching this video months and or years after I've uploaded, the link to part two will be below. I might put a link at the top if I remember. But if it's relatively soon after this video goes live, you're gonna have to wait a few months until I finish this. And a lot of what I'm saying right now, I'm going to also include into the intro for part two. So I apologize for those of you who are hopping over to part two, because you're going to hear me repeat myself. But in this book, the Osprey Publishing 303 Bombardment Group, there is some color palettes, and included in it is markings for this YB-40 that I'm building. This is the one, actually, I take that back. I'm doing this aircraft, but I'm doing it from BN, the other, the 395, not 395th bomb squadron, BN, instead of this, which is the 359th. So I'm doing what? The bomb squadron? Yeah, this doesn't make any. So there's a weird issue here where the 359th bomb squadron is BN, but it hasn't marked as PU. See, I don't understand now. I'm already confusing myself. 427th GN, BN is the 359th. It looks like the 359th. No, PU is the 360th bomb squadron. Yeah, so BN is the 359th bomb squadron, but this is marked as a 360th bomb squadron. So I'm actually doing BNQ. But this is kind of what I'm looking at in terms of time frame. I'm going to have the weathering similar to this, and you can't get markings for it. So I went ahead and used the Cricut, and I made up some maskings, and I'll show you. I made 2 copies just for shits and giggles in case I screw anything up. Don't mind, there's some other ones I put in here that are no good. I don't know if I'm going to be able to catch that in the light, but these are my vinyl masks for this aircraft. So I've got squadron codes, tail numbers, the tail code, and I have in here the little machine guns that go on the nose. So I'm going to start painting this, and I'm going to do it up, and I'm going to actually use, for the squadron codes anyways, I'm going to use vinyl masking. So I'll paint, you know, a yellow section on the tail, then I'll mask off the tail numbers, and then I'll paint the belly gray. And when I paint the gray, I'm going to bring the gray up over the fuselage, and then I'll mask off the fuselage codes and the tail code, which was in neutral gray. And then I'll go ahead and paint it all in olive drab. And I'm going to lighten the olive drab, and I'm going to do all the control surfaces in lightened olive drab, as well as pick out a few panels. And I'm going to switch to dark olive drab, and I'll do like the center of the tail in dark olive drab. And I might do some areas around here where, you know, there was some work done, you know, again, pick out the odd panel. I think the nose art had some paint over done. So I'm gonna just pick out with some darker colors around the lighter colors, and it's gonna variate the green a little bit. And then I can pull all those maskings off, and you'll have all the markings painted on, and then I'll just use decals for the national insignia and all the other stuff I need to do. So it's gonna look really cool. And then weathering, I'm gonna do not heavy weathering, but decent. I'm gonna have some exhaust staining, some oil staining, you know, make it look, black wash it, make it look really interesting, and then I can give it a set of flat coat and move on. So it's gonna look really cool when I'm hoping it's gonna look really cool when I'm done. It's gonna hide a lot of the imperfections. A good paint scheme will hide quite a bit of crime, and I'm hoping that's what's gonna happen. So we'll see how it looks, but that's the next step. So part 2 is coming up. Yeah, so I'm gonna wrap it up here. So like I said, if part 2 isn't in the description, just wait a little while. Keep an eye on my channel and the Facebook page, and I'll eventually have the links posted. If it is down there, by all means, jump over to episode 2, part 2. You can watch me with the finalize of this, move through the decals and the weathering and all that other fun stuff, and actually finish this kit off. So on that note, thank you all for watching. I know some of these videos can be long and boring, and I do appreciate if you managed to last this long. Yeah, we'll see you on the next one.